We continue to illustrate the meaning of numbers in scriptures because our faith has crucial foundations based on symbolic numbers, and so a sound understanding on how numbers are used in scriptures is equally important, because for not understanding these numbers as well as we understand other basics in our faith is why we are all messed up and shamefully divided on concepts that depend on numerical symbols for the most part. For an example, we wouldn't have such divisions based on what day in a week we are meant to be gathering if we knew how these concepts work, because Sabbath is also based on the concept of numbers in scriptures. And this is a small snippet of the damage done by being uninformed in this concept of numerical symbols in scriptures. Now, even worse, there are prophecies just around the corner waiting to be fulfilled. These clearly written in Moses' laws and Ezekiel's temple, and also given in the temple in Jerusalem. But all these given as numerical depictions. Even in the Gospels, there are dark sayings which Jesus Christ uttered, all things based on numbers in scriptures. Things impossible to understand if one doesn't have a background in these numbers, except of course he or she gets a revelation coming from the Spirit of God directly. Therefore, by our divisions in Christianity, we indicate that it's not enough to know that Jesus Christ died on the cross for our sins and yet remain ignorant in all other issues concerning our faith. For this division, some believers would be like the Jews when Messiah came, in that they all knew that Messiah would come. But when that would be also depended on knowing more than the fact that Messiah would come in the very sources from which they knew that Messiah is coming. This is the case today, in that we all know Jesus Christ saves and that some are going with him at his return. But that is as far as our uniformity in our faith goes concerning his return. Because if you go into specifics of his coming back, and it is confusion. For an example, we know that the Passover being on the 14th day, but we have no idea why the animal was chosen on the 10th in the same month or 3 days before. These are not redundant in scriptures. Therefore, for once, never think that God gave all these ordinances of the laws of sacrifice, but only to reveal that which is of the 14th, being the Passover, and that we should not understand the rest of them, since it seems that one day that most of us know what it meant is the Passover. So the onus is upon us to ask the Spirit of God to reveal the rest, or we would be like the Jews in understanding all these concepts. In understanding all these concepts correctly, then can we understand scriptures like Joseph's blessings, which defy our reality. Besides other cases like Ezekiel's temple having measures that defy any architectural viewpoint, which measures and parts in Ezekiel's temple God collectively calls the law of the house. That is in Ezekiel chapter 43. As the realities of the Passover day were written and were fulfilled, written for us, so shall all the realities of those other days be also fulfilled. The issue here is to understand what concerns us in these others, or else we may resist the living God as the Jews did when the fulfillment of the Passover came to them and they didn't know it. We saw two purposes already that are easiest among symbolic numbers, purposes of why these numbers are in scriptures. Now, going through a brief outline of their general purposes in scriptures, we start with the purpose that they are there to show or to distinguish classes of creations among rulers. That's the first purpose, or the one we start with. For an example, rulers signified as trees in scriptures. These were created on the 3rd day, and these scripture, for whatever reason, calls them Assyria. So by numerical symbolism, these or their circumstances are distinguished by the number 3 in scriptures, or fractions of it, or multiples of it, but rulers, for an example, called stars of heaven or other generalized as lights, created on the fourth day. These by symbolism go by the number 4 and its fractions or multiples. Likewise, rulers called dragons, whom we all know, the dragons of the 7 mountains in Revelation, created on the 5th day, of whom also Jesus Christ cited in calling them serpents, in that the Jews who practice things inspired by these rulers called dragons, those Jews also become called serpents, because dragons and serpents are terms which are synonymous for these rulers called dragons and serpents, and even worse, even called devils, even though devil simply means destroyer. Matters concerning them, these are distinguished by the number 5 or its multiples, rulers of whom we all have read in Revelation, but also called fishes in parables, or even ships, for whatever reason. They are the ones signified by the number 5, because they are created on the 5th day. This is how these numbers distinguish these rulers by creation, even though that word dragon is mistranslated in Genesis as whales, but it's dragon. But now the prophets also use that term dragon to mean serpents for whatever reason. They are the creatures signified by the number 5. That's what these numbers are there for. And so when you see an item in the temple that measures 5 or 15 or any number or measure or count with a 5 in it, know that these creations of God are in the context. They are in the context directly as a reference, or their circumstances being the reference, but in the context of another ruler concerned with their circumstances. So if themselves are not the direct reference, yet another ruler concerned with their issues is the one in reference. For an example, in the temple in Jerusalem, wings of the cherubim were 5 cubits in measure. That means each wing 5 on each side to touch the wall. It concerned rulers called cherubim in the context of these lesser ones signified as dragons. All these shall be renewed, even as Colossians chapter 1 verse 20 says. They are the seas in Revelation. They are the crystal sea in Revelation, or the depiction of a sea on 10 bulls in the temple. And many places you may have seen that 5. That is the symbolic number which isolates their circumstances in the context. Not to go into details, or I would lose many, but this is a snippet of how these numbers are used concerning rulers. Taking another use of these numbers, they show extent of dominion of rulers, whether limited or covering all the earth. Now don't forget this. The earth to God is not the world. Let's say not only the world, and for the most part, it's not the world that God refers to when he says the earth. The earth has parts not seen, and this is the largest part of what God calls the earth, because the world is very small in spiritual utterances. If a number therefore is a multiple ending with 0, then it shows realities concerning all the earth. The earth would mean by parts seen and unseen. But if the number is a normal number, then issues signified by that ruler, given in figures of numbers, issues that concern him, they are only in part of the earth. If a number therefore is a multiple ending with a 0, then it shows realities concerning all the earth with parts unseen. But if the number is a normal multiple, then rulers in the picture are not concerned with all the earth, but a part of it. For an example, if rulers signified as trees are given in a context, their number is 30. It means they are concerned with issues in all the earth. The earth meaning parts seen and unseen. But if they are given in the context as 35, then they are concerned with only a section of the earth and concerned with issues of these other creations called dragons. That's the other part 5 in that number. That's the use of the other part of a 5 in that 35. This is how this figure works in scriptures. This is how the extent of dominion is pinned down by these numbers. Therefore, the whole point of measures of curtains in Exodus, that small structure signified ages, as you see in Hebrews, because Hebrews teaches that sections of that structure were themselves tabernacles and symbolic for ages in Hebrews chapter 9. Therefore, God says to David, I have moved from tent to tent and from tabernacle. Whereas physically speaking, we only know of one tabernacle in our visible realm and not a tent, let alone from tent to tent, because this was a figure to mean other creations sanctified by God, for which they were called tents, even as humans are sometimes called so, for his dwelling. The third use of these numbers is to signify amount of influence of a ruler over the earth, that is among creations with influence. The kind of influence referred to here concerning dominions over all the earth. As an example, we refer to well-known spirit rulers called dragons or serpents, we just saw, whose dominion over all the earth is designated by the number 10 in the 10 horns. Or you can read in Daniel chapter 7, when the angel comes to the fourth beast, which had 10 horns, he highlights how this one shall devour the whole earth, in comparison to the first three, whose influence was limited to sections of the earth. Or when we come to Zechariah, we see a flying curse, whose dimensions are given as 20 and 10. And then that aspect of working in all the earth is also mentioned by the angel because of this multiple of 10. That is the purpose of a 10 to mean dominions that cover the world of men and places unseen. That is the whole earth. But if their circumstances as unique creations were not considered by their dominion, then their numbers are given as a simple count or a measure, not a multiple of 10. For an example, if rulers called dragons, because these we all know, then it is not a multiple of 10, but just 5. If they are concerned with only a section of the earth. But there are also other rulers called goats or rams. Then in the context, they will also be given simply by a number, a simple number, not of 10. But if over all the earth, then they are given in the context of multiples of 10. As we see their horns given as 10 in the case of the dragons. This is just a snippet of how this device works in scriptures, in outlining circumstances of rational beings with influence in the earth. So going to the fourth use or purpose of this figure of speech, it is there to show an order of beings relative to their holiness. And here we have two numbers mainly, which is a 2 and a 9. These are unique labels for the two contrary natures we know in creation. That is the nature of light and that of darkness. Though detailed explanations are coming. But also, the 3 can also be used in this context of showing natures which are problematic, in that they have become wicked. But where the number 3 is used, it doesn't always show that creations indicated there are wicked. Only in the context, it can be inferred that these are wicked. For an example, the third of trees burnt in Revelation, that ordinal number, the third of trees, signified creations created on the third day that had now become wicked. That is the aspect of being burnt. But in Isaiah, that third is given in the context of Israel becoming the third with Assyria, not in the context of wickedness. So this is the exception with this number of 3, in that it can show both the wicked and the righteous. In the case of the figure of 2 and certain of its multiples, it signifies places where the Spirit of God dwells. It signifies holy issues, or where a remarkable presence of the Spirit of God is. That is why the Holy of Holies of the temple in Jerusalem was all 20 cubits in measure. But also in the same temple was an external altar of 20 and 10. Wider illustrations come shortly, that we may know the differences here. So these are just brief outlines, but this is how these numbers show an order of beings being of a problematic nature or related to holy issues. The next use of these numbers is that in scriptures, at least 2 numbers show 2 dispensations of the laws of God. We could say ways of God. for his creations and activities of certain rulers that fall within these two eras of the ways of God. For an example, we saw the seventh beast and an eighth beast, in that the seventh beast was concerned with issues of the laws of sacrifice, but an eighth beast, not the eighth but an eighth, signified issues concerning the ways of Messiah, that is the ways of the elect. That's why that beast stays all the way to perdition. This we saw already in detail. For an example, the dispensation of ways of God in the 1,000 years of Messiah's reign. What we mean with a dispensation, for an example, we have ways of God under the reign of Messiah in their 1,000 years, in the millennium, all which times these numerical numbers or labels show as unique times with respect to ways of God. So at least two of these numbers show divisions of these ways of God, of which is the 7 and 8. Others we shall show, but after we've had a good background of all these numbers. These are the fundamentals in this concept of numerical symbolism in the Bible. And we have only touched mainly on the symbols when in single figures or basic multiples of 10. But figures which are a combination of at least two of these numbers are the real message bearers in prophetic utterances in the Bible. For an example, the 10th of choosing the lamb of sacrifice before the Passover. So the lamb had to be chosen on the 10th day, but that lamb was kept until the 14th day. And then the 15th day followed a series of other observances. All these things have to be understood. And so just as the 14th we have come to know, but the 15th we don't, and certainly the 10th before the 14th is one case with me here, in that these are the real message bearers. And so just as the 14th we have come to know what it means, but the 15th we don't, and certainly the 10th before the 14th, yet as things that concern the way of holiness, these are crucial to understand, because these are all coming to be fulfilled. If you know what the 14th means, you must know what the 15th means, and the 10th before the 14th. That is the purpose of this teaching, that we may know what on earth these things are therefore in scriptures, just as a Jew may once have wondered what on earth meant the 14th. That is why we again find that combination in the 144 measure of the wall in Revelation, or the other cases in the measures of Ezekiel's temple. These all signify detailed circumstances of specific rulers and their times, and yet we become some of these rulers. So we shall show some of them and their circumstances, including the well-known 14th of the Passover and that of the 15th, much later. Two of which celebrations in figures of speech should be of interest to any serious follower of God, that we may understand what many of these traditions mean, many of which are done simply as mere traditions with no purpose to them, or even they understand that they have a purpose, then they are done incorrectly. And that is a breeding ground of devils, because these things were given up to the destroyer. That is all in scriptures. So when David in spirit speaks saying, let their table be made a snare to them, he made these things. They were made for their righteousness, but now they were given to the destroyer. We can't go into details, but that's the idea of understanding why these rituals were given in scriptures. As you may have sensed how particular this figure of numbers can get in pinning down points of interest concerning rulers, it necessarily means that in views concerning prophecies given by numbers, say the Passover or these times of observance, many not familiar with this use of numbers in scriptures have believed superstitions or wrong teachings in scriptures, because apparently of all concepts in the Bible, this numerical symbolism is the one commanded by occultists for their diabolical ends. To give you a glaring example, God says circumcision must be done on the 8th day without fail, because of what that 8 signifies and what male circumcision also signifies. So when Islam teaches that circumcision must be done on the seventh day or whenever they see fit, but these claim to follow Abraham in their religion, what kind of spirit teaches against what God gave? Anyway, combinations of these numbers are there to show who is who among the rulers in the context, like the 35 we saw, or the 4,500 of Ezekiel's gates, and other detailed depictions showing these numbers. The reason being that for every ruler, there is at least one or more elements in the context to show or identify their circumstances. And so each of these rulers, given in a context, has at least one or two numbers, since his nature alone means a unique symbol, let alone his influence as a ruler. These both are uniquely represented by a numerical symbol. For an example, if a ruler over rulers is given in the context, then two or more of these figures could appear to show that station concerning him as a ruler over rulers, unlike elsewhere that these figures didn't appear concerning that ruler, because in that place he was indicated just as a ruler and not as a ruler over rulers. These things are all in these scriptures. For an example, princes can be signified by the number 1 or by the number 4. So when the Bible says princes, it refers to rulers as we see in Daniel, the goats and the rams that fight. Those are the kinds of rulers we refer to here. These are the ones signified by these numbers. And so because there are princes who are higher than other princes, just as Messiah is high over all them, so are these numbers employed to show that distinction. Therefore, Messiah's circumstances can be signified by 14. That's why you see that 14 in the 14th day, or its multiples. And this is where the symbolism of the Passover therefore comes in, where this first part refers to him, because even though he is God, but being a prince, the number 1 is therefore those called princes. So this first part refers to him, and this second part refers to lesser ones who are mighty, because God speaks of things that are not as though they are. That's the point of the 14, because that is the meaning of the number 4. And this second part refers to lesser ones who are also mighty, because that is the point of that number 4 in scriptures when it's a symbol. Now we haven't come to the number 4 and all these numbers, but we're just giving you or illustrating how this combination of numbers is used in scriptures. That was the structure used on the curtains as well in the tabernacle or temple items. Therefore, princes over lesser rulers would therefore be depicted by a host of numbers, say from 12 to 15, or other combinations which are more harder to decipher from a context. But in best cases, a 12 up to a 14 would be one of the combinations that show the kind of rulers who are in the context. So if you have been following closely, you can now infer why we have the 14th and the 15th in the first month following each other, but that 15th also found in the 7th month on its own. Now, not to jump the gun entirely, let's wait for detailed explanations, because I'll lose many if we go into details at this point in time. But as an outline, this is the case for ruler over rulers, given by two numbers. That is given as a combination of two or more of these numbers. As we see 144 units of a measure of a wall, whereby John says that measure was a measure of a man, but then he calls that man an angel. It is that detailed, but not hard to understand. This is the nature of information we are dealing with whenever we look at a number in scriptures which is used in a figurative sense. As we have said, that's the purpose of these numbers. As you consider 144 or the 4,500 in Ezekiel and many other combinations you may have read. These are the issues signified there. We have all read these things in scriptures, but we normally cannot understand what they mean. For example, when Jesus Christ fed 5,000 and the 4,000, these were prophetic. As you can see, when he chose Peter, he called him to fish or to be a fisher of men. And yet Jesus never for once referred to his followers as fishes, but always as lambs, because that was prophetic. Just as his sitting on 2 donkeys was prophetic. So you can wonder how he could sit on 2 donkeys. These were all figures of speech, prophecies in the Bible. The 2 donkeys were in Genesis and in Zechariah. But we think most translations try very hard to misrepresent. When Jesus Christ directed the apostles to go to Galilee, a place not in favor with Pharisees and scribes after his resurrection, these were all symbolic realities just around the corner, some of which realities are signified using this figure of speech of numbers, particularly a 4, a 5, a 7, and a 10. And that was the meaning or the reason why God says that your fasts in the 4th, the 5th, the 7th, and the 10th month, there will be fasts of joy. Joy being symbolic or walking in righteousness or being a light. That's why when Jesus referred to John as a prophet, he said, people of Israel rejoiced in his light. That's the meaning of joy in his spiritual utterances, to mean one who is a light. Because a fast to God signifies to do righteousness, either as a teacher or just one as walking in righteousness. That is a fast, that is a joy in Zechariah chapter 8 verse 9. Now let's see cases of these symbolic numbers and what they mean in plain terms. That is, what circumstances or creature they indicate generally or specifically, but giving short references for those who are quick, who have understood this figure of speech from the very start. We start from the first case. In scriptures that are prophetic or figurative, measures or counts of 1 and 2 or their multiples refer namely to these issues. The first one being that the Holy of Holies is represented by the number 1 and number 2 for the most part, are these fractions. Now the phrase holy or the holy primarily refers to spirits near God's sacred things, but often translated as saints in the Old Testament. And most of them are powerful servants of God, these who are near sacred things, who are signified by the number 1 and 2 or its fractions. So these are whose matters are signified by those small numbers or sacred items, for the most part, which are found in the Holy of Holies and even in the outside. For an example, the altar is also a sacred item and is called the Most Holy, and yet it's not inside. But those items marked with those figures of 2